Attention night dwellers. Congratulations on choosing knowledge over more menial dopamine, but this is best experienced while completing your nightly rituals or lying in bed contemplating your life choices. If you're seeking quick entertainment fixes, your dopamine dealer is in another castle. For those ready to embrace enlightenment in the dark, welcome to Learn at Night. Your FBI agent approves of this educational decision. You already know they're watching and subscribed too.
All right, strap yourselves in, folks, because tonight we're going deep on something really, really fascinating.
Oh, yeah. This is one of those topics that just grabs you and doesn't let go.
Ancient libraries.
Yeah, but not just like, the books and scrolls.
We're going way beyond that.
We're talking about the people, the secrets hidden for centuries.
And maybe even millennia.
Exactly.
What if I told you that these ancient libraries, they weren't just repositories of knowledge?
They were like training grounds for the human mind.
Pushing the boundaries of perception and awareness in ways we're only beginning to understand now.
That's what's so captivating about this deep dive. We're not just exploring the existence of these ancient scholars, these so-called silence keepers.
We're going to try and understand their incredible abilities.
And what their legacy can tell us about the hidden potential of the human mind.
Exactly. We're going beyond the history books, beyond the archaeological digs.
And really trying to grasp the implications of what they discovered in the darkness.
And what's remarkable is that we're not piecing this together from just a few scattered fragments.
We have remarkably detailed first-hand accounts, personal diaries, even training manuals.
All hinting at a level of sensory development that seems to defy our modern understanding.
It really does feel like we're getting a glimpse into a lost world, a world where knowledge wasn't just read, it was experienced with the entire body.
And it all starts beneath the sands of Alexandria, right where the legendary ancient library once stood.
Dr. Elena Markov and her team were excavating this site, and what they stumbled upon changed everything.
Fragments of papyrus tucked away in a hidden chamber.
Revealing the existence of these silence keepers, nocturnal scholars who worked in complete darkness.
And this wasn't just some quirky night shift.
This was a highly specialized, almost secretive branch of scholarship.
I can't help but think about how much we take artificial light for granted. Flicking on a switch, scrolling through our phones in bed, illuminating every corner of our lives.
But these folks, they embraced darkness. They made it their tool, their ally.
That's such a crucial point. The silence keepers didn't just tolerate darkness. They saw it as a medium for a different kind of knowledge, a different way of perceiving the world.
Their training was all about honing their senses to a level that seems almost superhuman to us.
Okay, let's get into the specifics.
We have this incredible quote from Theron, one of the silence keepers,
where he talks about his training.
After 3 months, my fingers began to read the temperature variations between shelves. Texts frequently consulted carry a warmth distinct from their neglected neighbors.
It's like he's describing a sixth sense.
It goes beyond even a sixth sense. They talk about near touch, air touch, even dark touch.
All these categories of perception that seem to defy the limits of our known senses.
I'm already getting a bit mind blown.
But before we go too far down the rabbit hole, I think it's important to ground this in what we know about human perception. I mean, we all know we have 5 senses, right?
Sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing.
But the silence keepers seem to be hinting at something more, something beyond our everyday experience.
Absolutely. Think about proprioception, for example. That's our sense of where our body is in space, even when we can't see.
We know we can navigate a dark room without bumping into things because our brain is constantly processing information from our muscles and joints.
The silence keepers seem to have taken this to an extreme level.
Developing an awareness of their surroundings that went far beyond what we typically experience.
Right. And then there's echolocation, like how bats use sound waves to navigate and hunt in darkness.
Some blind individuals have developed remarkable echolocation abilities too.
Using clicks or taps to create sound waves that bounce off objects, giving them a sound map of their surroundings.
And even within our known senses, there's so much potential for expansion.
Think about wine connoisseurs who can distinguish subtle nuances in flavor.
Or perfumers who can identify hundreds of individual scents.
The silence keepers seem to have approached sensory development with a level of dedication and sophistication that we're only beginning to rediscover today.
It makes you wonder what we're missing out on. What hidden dimensions of reality are just waiting to be perceived if we can only train our senses differently. It's like we're all walking around with these incredible sensory instruments.
But we're only using a fraction of their potential.
And the Silence Keepers didn't just develop these abilities overnight.
They had a whole system.
A meticulously structured approach to sensory training, what they called the Great Dimming, was a 40-day period of gradually decreasing light exposure.
It's like the ultimate dark adaptation retreat.
Okay, I'm picturing myself trying to survive 40 days in near total darkness, and all I can imagine is a lot of stubbed toes and panicked calls to the pizza delivery guy.
But these folks, they embraced it. They saw it as a way to sharpen their other senses, to unlock a new way of perceiving the world.
Exactly, and it wasn't just about sitting in the dark. They had a whole system of exercises and practices.
Almost like a sensory gym for the mind.
Imagine training chambers with walls featuring graduated texture patterns, each designed to challenge their tactile perception.
They even had instruments for measuring air currents and calibrating weights, all in complete darkness.
It's like they were scientists of the senses, studying and manipulating their own perception with a level of precision that's both fascinating and a little bit intimidating.
And what's so remarkable is that this wasn't just some abstract philosophical pursuit.
The Silence Keepers were using these enhanced senses to do something very practical.
To organize and preserve knowledge in a way that had never been done before.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. We've got these superpowered scholars trained in the art of darkness perception.
But what were they actually doing in those dark archives?
I mean, were they just hanging out in the dark, feeling up scrolls?
What was the purpose of all this sensory wizardry?
That's what makes this deep dive so compelling. They were the guardians of knowledge.
But the way they organized and interacted with that knowledge was unlike anything we've ever seen before.
Their methods challenged our very understanding of what a library is, what a book is, and what it means to truly read a text.
All right, I'm officially hooked. We've got to unpack this.
But you know what? I think we need a moment to let all this sink in. We've gone from dusty scrolls to sensory superpowers to secret archives, and I feel like we're just getting started.
Yeah,
I'll
definitely.
be right back after a quick break.
So we've been talking about these incredible sensory abilities, this whole idea of experiencing knowledge through touch, sound, even subtle shifts in energy.
It's easy to get caught up in the wow factor.
But I think what's truly remarkable is how the Silence Keepers applied these skills to something as seemingly mundane as organizing a library.
Right, because when we think of libraries, we picture rows of books, card catalogs, maybe a stern librarian telling us to shush.
But the Silence Keepers, they turned the whole concept of a library on its head.
He created a system that was both practical and, dare I say, poetic.
And imagine the level of trust involved to hand over these precious scrolls, these irreplaceable pieces of history, to scholars working in absolute darkness.
It suggests a deep understanding of human potential.
A belief that knowledge could be accessed and preserved through senses beyond sight.
Okay, so let's picture ourselves stepping into one of these dark archives.
I'm assuming no flashlights allowed.
What are we going to encounter?
Well, first of all, you wouldn't be encountering much in the way of visual cues. These archives were designed to be navigated entirely through touch and sound.
So imagine smooth, cool stone floors underfoot, perhaps the faint echo of your own footsteps in the vast chambers.
So it's not just about darkness, it's about silence, too.
A kind of sensory deprivation that forces you to rely on your other senses. It's like they're creating an environment that primes the mind for a different kind of perception.
Precisely.
And the silence wasn't just the absence of noise, it was an active practice.
A discipline that trained the mind to focus, to become receptive to subtle cues that might otherwise be missed.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So no flickering torches,
Yeah.
no rustling papyrus, no whispered conversations, just the deep enveloping silence and the feel of cool stone beneath your feet.
It's starting to sound less like a library and more like a sensory deprivation tank.
And in a way, you're not wrong.
Modern sensory deprivation research has shown that when we limit external stimuli, our brain starts to process internal signals differently.
We become more aware of our own heartbeat, our breathing.
The flow of thoughts and emotions.
It's like those flotation tanks you hear about, where you're suspended in darkness and silence, and your mind starts to wander into these amazing, sometimes bizarre states of consciousness.
Exactly.
And remember, this was centuries before modern neuroscience.
The Silence Keepers seem to have intuitively understood that darkness and silence weren't just about limiting perception, they were about expanding it, opening the mind to a whole new realm of experience.
All right, so we're in this dark, silent archive. Our eyes are useless. Our ears are straining for any sound. What are our hands doing?
Are we feeling our way along walls, stumbling over scrolls?
Not quite.
Remember, this wasn't chaos, it was order. The Silence Keepers were meticulous in their organization.
And here's where it gets really fascinating.
They had a dual documentation system.
Intriguing. Tell me more about this dual system. Was it like a secret code only decipherable by those initiated into the ways of the Silence Keepers?
In a way, yes. The first system was the one we're familiar with, visible texts written on scrolls and tablets.
But alongside this, they developed a hidden archive, a library within a library, accessible only through their enhanced touch.
A secret library.
Okay, now you're speaking my language.
Okay.
So how did they create this hidden archive? Invisible ink.
Magic spells.
Did they have some ancient version of Braille?
Braille is a good analogy, but their methods were even more ingenious. They used a variety of techniques, all based on creating tactile variations that could be read by touch.
Okay, so not invisible ink, but more like invisible writing.
I'm picturing those novelty pens that write in clear ink only visible under a special light.
But in this case, the special light is the sensitivity of their trained touch.
You're on the right track. Imagine writing tools that create indentations on specially prepared surfaces. And they had these calibrated weights to ensure consistency in the depth and spacing of the indentations. So they're not just writing words. They're creating patterns, textures, almost like a form of ancient 3D printing.
It's like they're turning writing into a sculptural art form.
And the materials they used were just as important. Think about papyrus, for example. We usually think of it as a writing surface.
But the Silence Keepers were also interested in its tactile properties.
They would carefully select papyrus with specific textures and densities depending on the intended use.
So they're not just scribes, they're material scientists too.
They're thinking about the feel of the ink, the texture of the surface, how these elements interact to create a multi-sensory reading experience.
It's like they're creating a symphony of textures.
And don't forget the acoustics of those chambers, the way sound would reverberate, creating a kind of sonic landscape that helped them navigate and orient themselves.
Imagine being able to hear the layout of the archive, the different densities of the shelves, even the presence of other scholars moving through the darkness.
Okay, now I'm starting to feel a bit overwhelmed. We've got tactile writing, acoustic mapping, and who knows what other sensory tricks they had up their sleeves. It's like they're operating on a whole other level of perception, a level we can barely comprehend with our modern light-saturated minds. And here's where it gets even more mind-boggling. Remember those night scripts? We talked about those texts, supposedly visible only in complete darkness?
Oh, right, the mysterious night script.
Well, those were part of this hidden archive, too.
Oh, right, we've got to get back to those. They've been lurking in the shadows of this conversation, just waiting for us to circle back.
So remind us, what were these night scripts all about?
What made them so special, so invisible?
Well, the Silence Keepers' records describe them as textual elements that only became perceptible in the absence of light. It's like they were using inks or pigments that reacted to darkness in a way we haven't been able to replicate.
Okay, so it's not just about the feel of the text. It's about a visual element that's somehow tied to darkness. Was it some kind of bioluminescent ink glowing in the absence of light?
Or maybe they were using pigments that changed color depending on the level of illumination.
That's the mystery.
We've found traces of these pigments, but we haven't been able to fully understand their properties. Some researchers speculate they might have used materials that reacted to subtle changes in temperature or humidity, perhaps even to the electromagnetic fields generated by the human body.
Intriguing. So imagine a scroll that looks perfectly blank in daylight. But when you bring it into the darkness and your body heat comes close to it, suddenly these hidden texts begin to glow or shift color.
It's like a secret message revealing itself only to the initiated.
And remember, this wasn't just about hiding information. The Silence Keepers saw darkness as a medium for a different kind of knowledge, a knowledge that was more experiential, more embodied. Okay, getting a real secret society vibe here. Hidden texts, special inks, scholars working in darkness. It's like a scene from a Dan Brown novel.
But it wasn't just about secrets and rituals. The Silence Keepers were also using these techniques to explore the natural world in ways that were far ahead of their time.
Wait, really? So they weren't just librarians, they were scientists too.
What kind of research were they doing in those dark archives?
Well, this is where we move from the realm of the merely fascinating to the truly mind-boggling.
The Silence Keepers were meticulously documenting what they called night manifest events. These were phenomena that could only be perceived in the absence of light.
Okay, now we're getting into the spooky stuff. What kind of phenomena are we talking about here? Ghosts?
Astral projections?
Alien encounters?
Not quite that dramatic, but definitely pushing the boundaries of what we consider normal perception. They describe subtle shifts in energy patterns of resonance, changes in the density of materials, even faint bioluminescent effects.
So it's not that these phenomena didn't exist in daylight, it's that our light-adapted eyes simply couldn't perceive them.
It's like they were tuning into a whole spectrum of reality that's usually hidden from our view.
And here's what's really remarkable.
Yeah.
The silence keepers weren't just passively observing these phenomena.
They were actively investigating them, developing instruments to measure air current variations, changes in material density, even fluctuations in electromagnetic fields.
Okay, so they're not just mystics feeling the vibes they're taking, measurements, collecting data, analyzing patterns. They're like the original paranormal investigators, but with a much more sophisticated understanding of the natural world.
And remember, this was centuries before the scientific revolution, before we had microscopes and telescopes and all the tools we take for granted today. The silence keepers were exploring the unseen world with their own ingenuity, their own carefully honed senses, and a deep reverence for the mysteries of nature.
It makes you wonder how much we've lost, how much knowledge has been forgotten, dismissed, or simply overlooked because we become so reliant on our visual perception.
And here's where the night scripts come back into play.
The silence keepers reported that these texts weren't static. They would change, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, depending on the conditions in the archive. Whoa, hold on. The texts themselves were changing. Were they using some kind of disappearing ink?
Or was it more like those heat-sensitive mugs where the image appears when you pour hot liquid in?
It's more like, imagine a text that appears blank in daylight, but when you bring it into darkness and your body heat comes close to it, suddenly these hidden texts begin to glow or shift color.
Oh.
Because they're not just reading text, they're interacting with them, almost like having a conversation with the scrolls themselves.
Exactly.
And this brings us to one of the most perplexing aspects of the Silence Keeper's legacy.
Those text shadows we discussed earlier.
Okay, the text shadows, those are the ones that really creep me out. Remind us what those were all about.
The text shadows were reported as apparent changes in the content of the scrolls, visible only in darkness. Imagine reading a scroll in daylight and then taking it into the darkness of the archive, and suddenly entire passages appear that weren't there before.
Wait, hold on. The text itself was changing.
Not just revealing itself,
but actually changing.
How is that even possible? Was it some kind of ancient word processor magically rearranging the letters on the page?
That's the million-dollar question.
The accounts are incredibly detailed, and they appear consistently across different time periods and locations. It suggests a phenomenon that transcended any single culture or technology.
Okay, now I'm starting to get a little freaked out. Are we talking about some kind of supernatural phenomenon here?
Or is there a scientific explanation for how these texts could seemingly change on their own?
Well, some researchers believe it might be related to subtle changes in the materials themselves, like temperature or humidity, affecting the visibility of certain inks or pigments.
But that doesn't fully explain the level of detail and consistency in the reports.
Right. It's not like the scribes were making typos in the dark. These were intentional changes, specific words and phrases appearing and disappearing as if the texts themselves were communicating something.
And that brings us to the heart of the mystery. Were the silence keepers simply enhancing their perception, or were they tapping into something more fundamental about the nature of information itself?
Okay, you've lost me. What do you mean by the nature of information itself? Are we going full meta on this?
Well, think about it. We tend to think of information as something that's fixed objective, written down on a page, or stored in a computer.
But what if information could exist in forms that are only accessible under specific conditions, like darkness or altered states of consciousness?
What if the silence keepers were, in a sense, reading the quantum fabric of reality itself?
Okay, mind officially blown. So we're saying that these ancient librarians weren't just ahead of their time. They were tapping into something that modern science is just beginning to understand.
Like they were quantum physicists before quantum physics even existed.
Exactly. And that leads us to the most groundbreaking aspect of this whole story. What if the silence keepers didn't just discover this capability, but were guided to it by something that exists in the darkness itself? Whoa! Now we're venturing into the truly unknown, so we've got these ancient scholars, these masters of darkness perception, possibly tapping into a hidden realm of information that exists beyond our everyday experience.
And modern researchers are just starting to catch up. This is getting seriously mind-bending.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
We haven't even touched on the most controversial findings, the ones that are making even the most skeptical scientists question everything they thought they knew about consciousness and reality.
Okay, you can't leave us hanging like that. We've gone from secret libraries to quantum physics to mind-blowing mysteries, and now you're telling me there's even more to uncover. I need a moment to process all this. All right, so we're back, and I gotta say, my mind is still reeling from all that we talked about in the last part.
Yeah, we went pretty deep there, didn't we?
Those night scripts, the quantum whispers, those libraries that are basically giant sensory deprivation chambers.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but I'm ready for more.
Good, because we're about to get into the really mind-bending stuff.
Bring it on.
Wow.
What does modern science have to say about all of this?
Well, get ready for some serious cognitive dissonance because modern researchers, when they tried to recreate the conditions of those ancient archives,
They started observing things that even the most hardcore skeptics couldn't easily dismiss.
it's pretty wild.
Okay, so we're talking about scientists, people trained in the art of observation and experimentation.
Suddenly encountering phenomena that sound more like science fiction than science fact.
Give me the details. What were they seeing? What were they experiencing?
Remember those night manifest events, those subtle shifts in energy and perception that only became apparent in darkness?
Yeah, the silence keepers talked about those a lot.
Well, it turns out that when modern subjects were placed in controlled dark chambers, they started reporting remarkably similar experiences.
Wait, so you're telling me that by simply recreating the darkness and silence of those ancient archives, modern researchers were able to induce some kind of heightened sensory state?
One where people started perceiving things that are normally invisible to us.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
It's even more specific than that. Researchers like Dr. Sarah Chen at the Sensory Perception Institute.
They've been replicating the silence keepers' training protocols.
And what they're finding is that subjects not only experience enhanced senses,
But they also start exhibiting abilities that defy our current understanding of neurophysiology.
it's really pushing the boundaries.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of abilities are we talking about here?
Are they reading minds, levitating objects, predicting the future?
Huh?
Well, no one's predicting the winning lottery numbers just yet,
Okay.
but the things they are observing are still pretty wild.
Like what?
For example, subjects have been able to accurately describe the contents of sealed scrolls without any physical contact.
Hold on. You're saying that by simply being in darkness and silence, people are somehow able to perceive information that's locked away inside a sealed container. That sounds like telepathy or clairvoyance, not science.
And that's precisely what's so perplexing. Neuroscience can account for some of the observed enhancements like increased sensitivity to touch and sound.
But these instances of information seemingly bypassing known sensory pathways.
That's where things get really interesting.
So we've got scientists observing things that seem to violate the laws of physics, or at least our current understanding of them.
And this is all happening because they're recreating the conditions of those ancient Silence Keeper archives.
It's almost like those archives weren't just libraries. They were gateways to a different level of reality.
That's a powerful way to put it. And here's where we circle back to the most mind-blowing aspect of this whole story.
Quantum mechanics.
Remember how we talked about the possibility that the Silence Keepers were tapping into something more fundamental about the nature of information itself?
Yeah, it was getting pretty meta there.
Well, it turns out that modern physics might actually have an explanation for how this could be possible.
Okay, I'm all ears. But before we get too deep into the quantum weeds, can you give me a crash course in quantum mechanics for dummies? What does this have to do with ancient libraries and mind-bending sensory experiences?
All right, so to put it simply, quantum mechanics is the study of how things work at the atomic and subatomic level.
Okay.
And one of the key principles of quantum mechanics is that particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, a concept known as superposition.
Superposition. Okay.
It's like a coin spinning in the air.
It's both heads and tails until you stop it and observe it.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm kind of following, but how does a spinning coin relate to ancient scholars reading scrolls in the dark?
Well, some physicists believe that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon, meaning that our minds might be able to interact with matter and information at a deeper level than we currently understand.
Whoa, okay, now we're getting to some serious matrix territory. So you're saying that our minds might be like quantum computers, able to process information in ways that are beyond our current scientific models.
Exactly. And here's where things get really interesting. Remember how the Silence Keepers were able to detect changes in the night scripts? Those texts that seem to shift and change depending on the conditions in the archive?
Yeah, the ones that gave you the texts that were basically rewriting themselves.
Well, some researchers believe that these text shadows might be a manifestation of quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement.
It's a mind-boggling phenomenon where two particles, no matter how far apart they are, can become linked in such a way that they influence each other instantaneously.
Wait, so you're saying that the scrolls themselves might be entangled with something else, something beyond our physical realm?
That's one possibility, and it gets even wilder. Remember how the Silence Keepers described those night manifest events? The subtle shifts in energy and perception they observed in darkness?
Mm.
Well, some physicists believe that these events might be related to quantum fluctuations in the vacuum of space itself.
Okay, now we're going full cosmic on this. We've
Yeah.
got ancient libraries, quantum entanglement fluctuations in the fabric of reality.
Mhm.
I'm starting to feel like we're not just exploring history, we're peering into the very nature of existence.
And here's the kicker. The Silence Keepers didn't just observe these phenomena. They documented them, they studied them, and they developed methods for manipulating them. Remember those specialized chambers with the graduated texture patterns and acoustic designs?
Yeah, those were pretty wild.
Well, some researchers believe that these chambers weren't just sensory gems. They were actually sophisticated instruments for manipulating quantum coherence fields.
Hold up, you're saying that these ancient scholars, using nothing but darkness, silence, and their own heightened senses, were able to create environments that influence the behavior of matter at a quantum level. That's like building a quantum computer out of stone and shadows.
And that's precisely what makes this whole story so mind-blowing. It suggests that the Silence Keepers weren't just ahead of their time. They were operating on a level of understanding that we're only just beginning to grasp today.
Okay, I need a moment to catch my breath. We've gone from dusty scrolls to sensory superpowers to quantum physics to the very fabric of reality. My brain is officially fried.
I hear ya, but we're not done yet. The most profound implications of this research are still unfolding. Remember those reports of subjects in the dark chambers experiencing information transfer that seemed to violate known physical laws?
Yeah, the ones that made me wonder if they were secretly installing psychic implants in those volunteers.
Well, it turns out that something even stranger might be at play. Researchers are now exploring the possibility that consciousness itself might be a non-local phenomenon, meaning that our minds are not confined to our physical bodies.
Okay, now we're entering the realm of the truly mind-bending. Are you suggesting that the Silence Keepers were able to somehow connect their consciousnesses to share information and experiences across time and space?
That's one interpretation, and it gets even more intriguing. Some researchers believe that the Silence Keepers weren't just tapping into a pre-existing network of information, they were actively contributing to it.
Wait, so you're saying that these ancient scholars were somehow uploading their knowledge and experiences into a cosmic database, like a giant interdimensional Wikipedia?
It's a radical idea, but it's one that's gaining traction in some scientific circles, and it raises some profound questions about the nature of consciousness, the limits of perception, and the very fabric of reality itself.
Okay, I'm officially in over my head, but I can't help but feel like we've stumbled onto something truly extraordinary here. What started as a deep dive into ancient libraries has turned into a journey into the unknown, a glimpse into the hidden potential of the human mind and the mysteries that lie at the heart of existence.
And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from this whole story. The Silence Keepers remind us that there's so much more to reality than what we can see and touch. They challenge us to question our assumptions, to expand our perception, and to embrace the mysteries that lie beyond the boundaries of our current understanding.
Absolutely. It's been an incredible journey exploring the world of the Silence Keepers, and I think we've all learned a lot about the hidden potential that might be lurking within us all.
And who knows, maybe out there listening right now, there's a future Silence Keeper just waiting to be awakened.
Until next time, stay curious.
Well, congratulations on separating yourself from the horde of dopamine zombies out there. Share this sacred knowledge with someone who still has a spark of curiosity left. Return tomorrow night when the digital cattle have exhausted their screen time. We'll be waiting with more forbidden insights.